The ground begins to tremble long before the enemy ever comes into view. This isn't the rumble of thunder or the creak of siege engines. It's the sound of hooves. Thousands of them, moving fast, way too fast. By the time you see the dust rising on the horizon, it's already too late to run. Because the Mongol army is coming, and they don't come to fight the world as it is. They come to remake it. In the early 13th century, if you asked anyone about the Mongols, they'd probably just shrug. Scattered nomads, they'd say. Tribes just trying to survive in one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. The Eurasian steppe had no grand cities to conquer, no walls to tear down, no lush farmland worth fighting for. But it forged a certain kind of person. People who basically lived in the saddle, who learned to hunt as children, and who understood endurance long before they ever knew comfort. And from the unforgiving world, a man emerged who would change history so completely that even centuries later, his shadow still stretches across continents. His name was Temujin, but the world would come to know him as Genghis Khan. He didn't inherit his power. He clawed his way to it, betrayed by his own allies, hunted by rivals, and shaped by constant danger. He learned a crucial lesson early on. Loyalty is far more valuable than blood. When he finally united the Mongol tribes, he did something radical. He shattered the ancient hierarchies. Your noble birthright meant nothing. Your skill meant everything. A simple shepherd who could lead 100 men was worth more than a prince who couldn't. That single, powerful idea would become the engine of the greatest military machine the medieval world had ever seen. The Mongol army wasn't massive by modern standards, but it moved like a force of nature. Speed was its ultimate weapon. Every single soldier had multiple horses, constantly switching mounts to stay fresh while their enemies were exhausting themselves, marching on foot. Armies that expected to have weeks of warning were suddenly struck in a matter of days. Cities that felt safe behind mountains or deserts discovered, way too late, that for the Mongols, terrain was just a suggestion, not a real barrier. At the very heart of this army was the horse archer. Imagine a warrior, trained from childhood, who could fire a bow with deadly accuracy while at a full gallop. Their composite bows were compact but incredibly powerful. But it wasn't just about the weapon, it was how they used it. Mongol units could communicate across a chaotic battlefield using flags, horns, and prearranged maneuvers, allowing thousands of riders to act as a single, deadly organism. Their favorite tactic, the feigned retreat. They pretend to run, luring their overconfident enemies into a reckless chase. Then, in a perfectly coordinated move, the Mongol lines would turn, encircle their pursuers, and simply erase them from existence. And they remembered everything. Mongol intelligence gathering was meticulous. Scouts would range far ahead of the main army, learning about enemy numbers, local politics, even personal rivalries. When they approached a city, they offered a choice: surrender and live, or resist and become an example. When a city chose to resist and was inevitably crushed, the survivors were allowed to flee, carrying the story of what happened. Fear itself became a weapon carefully cultivated and strategically deployed. Entire regions would collapse without a single major battle, just because the word of Mongol terror traveled faster than any army ever could. But beneath all the terror, there was a cold, calculating logic. The Mongols valued skill above all else, and that included artisans, engineers, and scholars. Cities that surrendered were often spared and absorbed into the growing empire. Siege experts from China were marched west to help conquer Persian cities. Persian administrators were sent east to help govern Chinese territories. Knowledge flowed freely across the empire, because the Mongols understood something revolutionary for their time. Conquest isn't just about destruction, it's about control. One of the biggest misconceptions is that the Mongols were just chaotic barbarians. The truth is, their army was rigidly organized. Units were structured in groups of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s, each with a crystal clear chain of command. Orders were absolute, and disobedience was fatal. Yet, within that strict structure, commanders were encouraged to use their own initiative. They were expected to think, to adapt, and to exploit any opportunity they saw. It was a system of perfect discipline without stagnation. Their logistics were just as impressive. Mongol armies didn't depend on long, vulnerable supply lines. Soldiers carried their own provisions, dried meat, fermented mare's milk, and could live off the land when they needed to. Their hardy horses could even dig through snow to find grass to graze on. This incredible self-sufficiency allowed Mongol forces to strike where traditional armies simply couldn't survive. Winter campaigns, once thought to be impossible, became routine for them. After Genghis Khan's death, his successors continued the conquest with terrifying momentum. The Jin dynasty in China fell. The Great Abbasid Caliphate collapsed. The Russian principalities were burned to the ground. In Europe, armored knights, full of confidence, were completely outmaneuvered and annihilated by riders they barely understood. At battles like Legnica and Mohi, Western armies learned a harsh and brutal lesson. Bravery means nothing without adaptability. Yet, the Mongols were not invincible. Their greatest strength, their mobility, also became their weakness in unfamiliar environments. The dense jungles of Southeast Asia slowed them down. Naval warfare completely baffled them. When they tried to invade Japan, their fleets were destroyed by massive storms, which the Japanese remembered as kamikaze or divine winds. The empire eventually found its limits, not just through military defeat, but through the sheer difficulty of trying to rule so much land. And then, the fractures began to appear. As generations passed, the unity that Genghis Khan had forged started to fade. The vast empire split into separate khanates. Each one was powerful, but they became increasingly independent. Mongol armies still ruled vast territories, but their coordination weakened. Local cultures began to reshape Mongol identity. Some converted to Islam. Others adopted Chinese systems of governance. The conquerors were becoming rulers, and rulers faced problems that arrows just can't solve. Still, the legacy of the Mongol army is impossible to escape. They redrew the map of the world, toppled ancient empires, and connected East and West in ways no one had before. Under Mongol protection, trade flourished along the Silk Road. Ideas, technologies, and even diseases traveled farther and faster than ever in human history. The modern world, in many ways, was born in the thunderous wake of their hooves. Perhaps the most unsettling truth is this: the Mongols didn't win just because they were cruel, though they certainly could be. They won because they learned faster than their enemies. They adapted. They listened. They promoted talent over birthright. They punished complacency. In an age of warfare, bound by centuries of tradition, they treated war like a science. When the Mongol army appeared on the horizon, all the old rules changed. Walls stopped mattering. Distance lost its meaning. Certainty vanished. And for one brief, violent, and astonishing moment in history, a people with no cities built the largest land empire the world has ever known. The dust eventually settled. All empires fall. But if you listen closely across the vast plains of Eurasia, across the pages of history, you can still hear it. The thunder of hooves. The sound of a world realizing, far too late, that it is about to be outrun. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories from history. See you next time.